What's up everybody, it's Matt from Peter Glenn, and in this video we're going to show you how to find the perfect stance for you and your riding style. Let's check this out. So you just got your new board and bindings and you want to get this thing set up, but the first thing that we need to know before we go throwing some screws into this thing is we need to figure out exactly what stance is actually going to work for you. So this is actually a pretty easy thing to do. We basically just need to figure out the width and we need to figure out the angles. So width is always the easiest one to do right off the bat. Now when you look at a snowboard, you'll actually see that most boards are gonna have what they call a reference stance. So on this board it says ref. Sometimes it says reference. There'll usually be some arrows pointed towards some inserts. Maybe there'll be some lines around them, but there will be some way to kind of tell you what the reference stance is. And what the reference stance is basically kind of the suggested stance. Basically say for an average rider, average height, and weight to be on this board, this is where we suggest you stand. But it doesn't mean you have to stand there. The board's not gonna work any better or any worse if you don't stand on those reference points. That's why they put all these other inserts in here. So if you're a little bit shorter and you're a little bit heavier, you're gonna be standing on the board probably a little bit closer than somebody who's taller and skinnier, because they're actually gonna feel a little bit more comfortable with their feet a little bit farther apart. So again, that's why they have those inserts and all the different selections, but that's why they give you the reference. It's kind of a good starting point. So if you do know what your stance is, actually that reference stance makes it really, really easy. Me personally, I ride about a 22.5, 23 inch stance, but a lot of times you can look at the board and it'll actually say this one, the reference stance is 21.7. So I know that if I mount it on the reference, I'm at 21, but I could actually move both bindings out just a little bit. I know I'm gonna be very, very close to my preferred stance. But if you don't know what your stance is, you basically kind of start with just the ground. You don't need the board. You can put the board down if you want, stand on it if you like, but you don't have to. But the main thing is you kind of get yourself in a position where you feel comfortable. A lot of times they'll say it's like you're standing in the outfield and you're getting ready for somebody to hit a ball to you. And that's kind of just, a good place to kind of start. But the main thing that you want to do is just get to a place where you feel comfortable. You don't want to feel like you're standing too wide. You don't want to feel like you're standing too narrow. You just want to feel kind of like you're ready to do something. And that's going to be your stance. And the nice thing is you can always move it. Just kind of get yourself set. And then what you're going to do is you're actually just going to need a tape measure. And you're actually going to measure from the middle of your foot to the middle of your foot. That's how you measure a stance. That's how this reference stance is measured. That's how they measure it, once the bindings are on, but that's how you figure it out. Middle of the foot to the middle of the foot. When you have the bindings mounted, you can measure from the middle of the binding to the middle of the binding. And that's going to be what your stance width is. So once you got the width figured out, now we want to figure out the angles. So angles are basically a lot of personal preference when it comes down to it. You don't usually ride with your feet straight across. Some people do. Again, just personal preference. The only things that you don't do with a snowboard is you don't ride with more angle in the back than you do have it in the front, and you don't ride pigeon-toed. But other than that, it's pretty much anything goes. Now, when people are starting out, great place to start, I always set people up at is I set them up at 0 degrees in the back, and then I usually get them at about 15 degrees in the front. So most companies, the discs themselves are actually gonna have notches and little grooves in there, and you can basically move them on those grooves. And each one of those grooves is usually 3 degrees. So as you move that disc and move the binding, you're basically adjusting 3, 6, 9, and that's kind of the standard when it comes to most bindings. Some companies might have a little bit different teeth. They might have a little different way of, moving the binding around. But in general, it's good to know that 3 degrees is pretty standard. So starting off with 0 in the back, that basically just keeps you nice and stable. And then by putting some angle on the front foot, the reason we suggest that is that when you are snowboarding, it's very, very easy to put pressure on your toes and to actually just take and stick your toes down in the ground. But when you lean back, it's not as easy. If you ever try to stand on your heels, it's very, very uncomfortable. And that's because you can't center your weight over your heels. So what you do is by angling that front foot a little bit, it does two things. It opens your shoulders up just a little bit, so it's a little bit easier to initiate those turns, but also you can use the outside of your foot when you're pushing on your heel side edge and kind of push some pressure into your calves. So again, starting off usually straight across in the back, angled on the front. Then from there, as you're starting to get better, a lot of people like to do what's called duck foot. They do a little bit of a duck stance. And it's basically you've got some angle on the front, and then you're actually going with negative angles on the back. So what you're doing is you're kind of ducking your feet out. What this does is it basically makes it so when you're riding one way and you're riding the other way, regular and switch, it kind of evens it out a little bit. It does help you initiate those turns when you're riding switch and try to make it feel a little bit more comfortable so it feels the same when you're riding one way versus the other. But that one's really up to you. If you like it straight across, go for it. If you like to have a little bit of angle, no problem with that. But again, the one thing that you're never gonna do is you're never gonna go more angle in the back than you do on the front. If you've got your front binding at, let's say 18 degrees, you're never gonna go past 18 degrees on your back foot. And then from there, we talk about forward, where actually both bindings are actually pointed forward. So a lot of people are going to be riding that zero angle or a little bit of that duck stance just because it's a little bit more of a freestyle kind of frame of mind. But if you are free riding, a forward stance can actually benefit you like crazy. I always kind of go back to like racers. If you ever seen the racers, they have those narrow boards and they stand on their boards with these super heavy angles. And yeah, they stand on it like that because they kind of have to because the boards are so narrow. But the biggest thing is we're going back to that toe side and heel side pressure. And again, you can stand on your toes all day long and you can bend over and squat because your weight stays centered when you're on your toes. On your heels, not so much. So if you're not riding switch a lot, you can really do a little bit heavier angle on the front foot and then angle that back foot forward a little bit too. And again, just like duck, we're never going beyond what the front foot is. But what this does is it actually allows you to use the outside of your front foot and the inside of your back foot, and you can actually push that pressure towards that heel side edge and you can crank turns like crazy. And the cool thing with this is like you could actually have one board where you're set up like this, and then you could have a park board where you're set up with a little bit of a duck stance. It's really just personal preference. Me personally, a lot of people think I'm kind of crazy, but I actually ride 15 degrees on my front foot, and then I actually ride +3 on my back, and if it's more all mountain free ride, I'll actually go 18 and 6. And the reason I do this is it's mainly the way I feel comfortable, and it's actually easier on my knees. I grew up in a time when the trend was big, wide duck stance, and that does actually put a lot of pressure on your knees. So if you have bad knees, doing a little bit of a forward can really be a game changer. And the way to kind of think of this is stand on the ground, spread your legs out, give yourself a little bit of a duck, and now bend your knees forward, and you'll actually feel pressure on the inside of your knees. Your knees do have medial and lateral flex to them, but not as much as your ankles. And when you do bend, you can actually feel it on the inside of the knee. Now, leave your feet exactly where they are, but angle your back foot forward. Now, bend your knees. You'll notice a lot less pressure, and that's basically because your knees, instead of bending inward, are now bending forward more. So forward is not a crazy stance, and it's not just for free riding. And not bragging, I ride switch probably half of the time, but all I do is I just turn my head and carve and don't think about it. I don't try to turn my body, and obviously it feels natural. And if it's something that you do want to try out, I don't suggest you going from your -15, boom, to forward, but basically take a day where you basically back it off, maybe go from 15, back it off to like maybe your back foot to like a -6, and then go to 0, and then go forward. And really kind of try it over a few days and just see how you like it and see how it feels. But at the end of the day, you really just need to be comfortable standing on your board. So no matter how you're standing, whether it is straight angle, even straight across, duck stance, or forward, as long as you feel comfortable standing on your board, that's the most important thing. And then once you go to put your bindings on your board, you can literally just measure it out, set your discs, mount them up, and you're ready to ride. But if you got any questions beyond what we talked about in the video, definitely leave some comments down below. We're on there every single day trying to answer your questions. We want to make sure we get you into some rad gear, but most importantly, we want to make sure it's going to fit you, it's going to fit your riding style, and you're going to be comfortable riding it too. Also make sure to like, subscribe, and definitely get that bell on too so you can find out when all the new videos drop. Grab yourself a new board, new set of bindings from Peter Glenn, get that thing mounted up, and get out and ride. Because any day riding is a good day riding.